Hi, and welcome to my presentation on my evidence-based education innovation. My name is Courtney Rosenthal, and I currently work as a unit-based educator in a surgical trauma ICU. My education innovation is virtual preceptor training for preceptors of new graduate nurses in critical care. My preceptor is the service line educator for all new graduate orientations within critical care. And when we first began planning my education innovation, I assumed that I would be teaching to one of my strengths. I teach a lot of pathophysiology and equipment-based competencies. But as I interviewed stakeholders and saw what our current state is, what came forward a lot to me was that my preceptor oversees the concurrent orientation of about 60 new graduate nurses in critical care over about 8 facilities. So truly, the preceptors on the ground are absolutely essential to a successful orientation for these nurses. What the data showed me is that about 23% of new graduate nurses are entering critical care as their first career, and that the gold standard now for new graduate nurses is a residency program. My organization has a residency program, but the efficacy of those programs are really variable across the data, across the literature. One of the key components of a successful new graduate residency program is nurse preceptors. And what the data has shown us is that nurse preceptors who attend a preceptor course are more comfortable and competent in teaching, as well as kind of knowing what their role is as a preceptor. The other thing that I learned is that with COVID-19, all in-person education for nursing professional development was canceled and had to pivot to a virtual format. So my preceptor was transparent with me that virtual education is a challenge for her, and it was definitely new territory for me as well. So that became the focus of my project. My project is a 2-hour synchronous virtual course that is taught using the Microsoft Teams platform. The attendance, pre-test, post-test, and course evaluation are all sent via Microsoft Forms, so all hands off. The content of the class is given via Microsoft PowerPoint, as well as, of course, like synchronous dialogue. And then we have a series of pre-recorded vignettes of preceptor-orientee interactions that we'll discuss as a class. I have invited both experienced and new preceptors to this course. Their commonality is that they are all in charge of precepting new graduate nurses in critical care units. This is currently just being offered at my facility. So that is a STICU, neuro ICU, MICU, cardiac ICU, and progressive care unit. When looking at how to structure this education, I found myself leaning heavily on pedagogy. And I found a pedagogy called intentional learning, which says that you can move a learner from a resistant state to a self-motivated and transformational state. And one of the barriers that we found when looking at preceptor development is that preceptors didn't feel valued and they didn't really see the purpose of their role. And so finding the necessity behind precepting and matching that in a virtual environment, which a lot of learners are resistant to, I found a lot of guidance through that intentional learning pedagogy. The goal is to get some buy-in. My learning theory that guided me was cognitive learning theory. That honestly is because my objectives, as I listed them out, most closely align themselves with cognitive learning. The data really speaks for itself in this capacity. I will put my credits in the video description, but what we know is that new graduate critical care residencies are the gold standard now for new graduate nurses. We know that preceptors have to provide clinical knowledge, social support, and professional role modeling for new nurses to be successful. And we know that preceptors are not born knowing how to precept, that we have to teach them, and that we see improved outcomes when these preceptors have training. We've also been able to see in the literature for this year that in COVID-19, this transition to virtual education has proven the value and efficacy of virtual nursing professional development. The objectives that I have put forward as my learning objectives are I want the participants to be able to describe the role of the preceptor. Sometimes holding both the ability to evaluate and socialize and teach is a lot to ask of one nurse, all while also overseeing the care of a patient. So being able to describe those roles and understand where they end and the role of a supervisor begins, or the role of a unit-based educator begins, and really empowering them to recognize the importance of their role in nurses, a new graduate nurses' professional development. I also want the participants to be able to compare two teaching strategies: return demonstration and direct questioning. What I saw when I was shadowing and observing preceptors in action is that preceptors tend to lean pretty hard on one teaching methodology that they're comfortable with. So some preceptors will just demonstrate what something looks like and ask the orientee to do it back, and then they're on their own. That's really great teaching if it's a psychomotor skill, but it's not as effective if we're trying to get that pathophysiology, that critical thinking. And so that's where direct questioning can come in. So the two really complement one another. There's, of course, a huge variety of teaching strategies that I would love to give my preceptors, but the overall goal is to get a baseline competency level for our preceptors of new graduate nurses in critical care. The last objective I have for my learners is that they will report an increased value in the preceptor role. As I've described, there is kind of a reluctance to precept. They feel like they're voluntold. They feel like they're kind of leaned on heavily in that capacity. So I really want my preceptors to feel valued, my learners to feel valued in this setting. I'm going to be assessing the efficacy of my education through a pre and post test. The expectation is that a score of 80% will mean that we've met the objective, but the change in knowledge level will kind of help me decide if I've taught the right content. So if my learners come in and they already get 100s on the pretest, well, then maybe I have picked the wrong content to teach. There also will be a course evaluation where they'll evaluate everything from me, the educator, but also the platform. Does Microsoft Teams really work? The pretest has a bunch of kind of situational based questions. So there are lower level questions like, what is the role of a preceptor? And then there are higher level questions. What the research has shown is that a 3-question multiple choice test is just as effective as a 4-option multiple choice test. So I did pick a 3-option multiple choice question test. While I think it's great that I have some short-term data that I'll be able to collect, I have some kind of long-term goals for this education. We're hoping to see if this goes well with this small sample group. I'm hoping that we can disseminate it across the organization. I do have some of the unit-based educators attending this offering as well, so that they can give me their in-person feedback. Not in-person, but kind of real-time feedback rather. So I would love to, if this proves to be effective, I'd love to disseminate it across the organization. But I also think we need to see the greater trends. So I hope to look at how many adverse outcomes are our new graduates involved in. Right now, it's a pretty high number, I think, compared to our experienced staff. So I would love to see if we have a decrease in those adverse events when we have taught our preceptors how to more appropriately oversee their orientation. I would love to look at turnover rate and see, is the turnover rate amongst the nurses who had an experienced trained preceptor better than those whose preceptors did not attend a class? And then I would love to see if it improves their overall engagement and satisfaction with their orientations. We know that the turnover rate of bedside nursing is pretty high, and so I am hopeful that this will prove to be a retention tool. That is everything about my education innovation. So let me know if you have any questions, and thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hearing about everyone else's. Thank you.